She called 911 on me for parking in my own driveway. Not a neighbor's driveway. Mine. The one I poured concrete on myself 12 years ago on land my name sits on at the county recorder's office without a single lien or encumbrance attached to it. What Diane Holloway did not know, what none of them ever know, is that my wife had spent 19 years practicing property and HOA law. The CC&R's Diane was waving at the responding officer? My wife had read documents like that before breakfast since the Clinton administration. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're from, and if an HOA has ever pulled something like this on you, I genuinely want to hear it. 5 stories are coming. 5 people who got steamrolled by someone with a clipboard and a title, and who quietly, legally, let the paper do the talking. The tow truck never left my driveway with my truck. But the story of how it didn't, and what happened to Diane Holloway afterward, that is where we begin. She had a tow truck hooked to my front bumper before 8 in the morning. The driver was young, maybe 22, and he had the decency to look uncomfortable. The chain was already cinched around the frame. I stood on my front porch in a work shirt and watched him not make eye contact. And I thought, somebody called this in. Somebody filed a complaint, paid a dispatch fee, and arranged for a stranger to remove my property from my own land before I had finished my first cup of coffee. That somebody was Diane Holloway, president of the Lakeview Terrace Homeowners Association. And she was standing at the edge of my driveway in pressed khakis and a lanyard that said Board President in laminated block letters, like a hall monitor who had been waiting 30 years for this moment. My wife, Carol, walked out behind me. She was still holding her coffee. She looked at the tow truck, looked at Diane, and said very quietly, "You're going to want to unhook that." Diane started talking about Section 4.7 of the CC&Rs. Carol said, "I know what Section 4.7 says. I also know it doesn't apply to a driveway that predates the CC&Rs by 6 years. And if that truck moves 1 inch, I will have an injunction filed before noon." The driver unhooked the chain in about 45 seconds. Diane's lanyard swung as she turned and walked away. Big mistake. Let me back up. My name is not Marcus Briggs, but Marcus Briggs is the man whose story I want to tell you first, because his started the same way mine did, with a citation he didn't deserve and an antagonist who had no idea what she was walking into. Marcus was 54 years old, a certified pipe welder with 31 years on industrial job sites across the Gulf Coast. He had worked in refineries, on offshore platforms, in the kind of heat that warps sheet metal and ages a man's hands a decade, for every 5 years on the clock. He was not a man who frightened easily. He had also, 14 months before this story begins, buried his wife, Sandra, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. He told me once that the speed of it was the part he couldn't get past, that he had barely had time to learn the name of the disease before she was gone. He moved to Cedarwood Pines, a quiet subdivision outside Beaumont, Texas, because Sandra had always wanted to live somewhere with old trees and a front porch. He bought the house anyway. He said it felt like finishing something she had started. He moved in during a July that smelled of pine sap and cut grass, and for 6 weeks, he was left alone. He planted a garden Sandra would have loved. He kept to himself. He parked his work truck, a 2017 Ford F-250 dark blue, clean, in his own driveway, same as he had done every night of his working life. Then Diane Holloway introduced herself. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with a clipboard, a printed citation form, and the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. She was the HOA president, she explained. She had held the position for 7 years. She wore a blazer to a Tuesday afternoon neighborhood walkthrough, which told Marcus everything he needed to know about how she understood her own authority. The citation read, "Vehicle parked in driveway creates aesthetic non-compliance per Section 6.2 of the CC&Rs. Commercial appearance vehicles must be stored in garage or removed from property during non-working hours." Marcus's garage was full of Sandra's things. He had not been able to clear it yet. He told Diane this. She nodded as though she had heard it before and said the rule applied regardless of personal circumstances. He had 14 days to comply. He documented the citation. He photographed it. He put it in a folder. He did not yet know how important that folder was going to become. Day 7. A second citation arrived. This one for a crack in his front walkway that Diane claimed violated the community's structural presentation standard. The crack was hairline. Marcus had been a welder for 31 years. He knew what a structural problem looked like. This was not one. He documented it anyway. Day 14. A letter from a company called Cedarwood Compliance Solutions, LLC, demanding a $75 administrative processing fee for the first citation. Marcus had never heard of Cedarwood Compliance Solutions. He looked it up. It was registered to a P.O. box in Houston. He wrote the name down and put it in the folder. Day 23. His truck's driver's side mirror was cracked. It had been intact when he parked the night before. He filed a police report. The responding officer noted the damage and moved on. Marcus photographed the mirror, the driveway, the timestamp on his phone. The folder was getting thick. Day 31. A flyer appeared in his neighbor's mailboxes. He found out about it from a neighbor named Gerald, a retired school teacher who brought one over with an apologetic expression. The flyer said that a resident on Marcus's street had been cited multiple times for property violations and was resistant to community standards. It did not name him. It did not have to. His was the only truck on the block. Day 44. A second letter from Cedarwood Compliance Solutions, this one for $150, claiming a late fee had been added to the original $75. Marcus had never paid the original $75. He had never agreed that he owed it. Day 52. Diane appeared at a neighborhood block meeting and described, without naming him, a homeowner who was undermining the community's property values through willful non-compliance. 3 of his neighbors looked at him. He looked back. He smiled. He documented the meeting in a handwritten note he dated and signed when he got home. Day 61. A man arrived at his property with a measuring tape and a clipboard and introduced himself as a surveyor hired by the HOA to verify Marcus's property line. Marcus asked to see his license. The man said it was on file with the HOA office. Marcus said he would like to see it now. The man left. Marcus photographed his truck, his license plate, and the direction he drove. He added it to the folder. Day 74. A formal letter arrived from something called the Cedarwood Pines Architectural Review Board, informing Marcus that a lien had been placed against his property for unpaid fines totaling $425. Marcus sat with that letter for a long time. Then he made a phone call. He called a property attorney named Sylvia Reyes, who practiced out of Beaumont and had a reputation for not losing. He brought the folder. Sylvia opened it, read quietly for about 20 minutes, and then looked up and said, "This is not a lien. This is a document that looks like a lien. There is a difference, and the people who sent this know the difference." Marcus asked her what that meant. She said it meant they had done it before. That was the turn. That was where Marcus stopped playing defense. Sylvia filed a public records request with the Texas Secretary of State's office for every entity connected to Cedarwood Compliance Solutions, LLC. What came back was a thread. The same P.O. box in Houston appeared in the registration documents of 3 other compliance companies, all operating in different HOA communities across Southeast Texas, all collecting fees from homeowners who did not know the fees were fabricated. Diane Holloway's name did not appear directly, but her sister's name did, and her sister's home address was the registered agent address for 2 of the 3 companies. Sylvia also pulled the full history of the Cedarwood Pines HOA and found that the lien process Diane had used against Marcus had never been authorized by a vote of the full board. It had been authorized by Diane alone. That was not how lien authority worked under Texas property code. That was not how it worked under the CC&Rs either. Marcus kept coming to HOA meetings. He sat in the back. He said nothing. He let Diane run her meetings and distribute her printed agendas and smile at the homeowners who still believed she was protecting their property values. He was patient. He had learned patience from 31 years of waiting for metal to cool before you could touch it. Diane announced a community town hall for the first Saturday in October. She invited a local television reporter, a segment she had apparently been planning for weeks, a feel-good story about neighborhood standards and community pride. She arranged for a photographer. She prepared remarks. She stood at the front of the Cedarwood Pines clubhouse in a blazer that matched her lanyard and began to speak about her 7 years of service to the community. Sylvia Reyes walked in at the 12-minute mark, accompanied by a Harris County investigator and a representative from the Texas Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Sylvia handed the board secretary a certified copy of the complaint that had been filed 4 days earlier. The investigator asked Diane to step away from the podium. The charge language, as later filed, included operating a fraudulent fee collection scheme targeting HOA residents, filing unauthorized liens against residential property, and impersonating a licensed surveyor through an unlicensed contractor. The television reporter got the story she came for, just not the one Diane had planned. Marcus did not say anything at the meeting. He sat in the third row and watched. On his way out, Gerald, the retired school teacher, shook his hand. Marcus nodded. He drove home in the dark, blue F250 and parked it in his driveway. He left the folder on the kitchen table. He did not need it anymore. The lien was vacated. The fines were voided. Diane Holloway resigned from the board the following Monday. Some paper just lands harder than others. Ray Kowalski had spent 38 years as a civil engineer before he retired, and he understood, in a way most people do not, exactly what a surveyor's stake in the ground actually means. He understood bearing angles and datum points and the legal weight of a recorded plat. He understood the difference between a boundary marker and a decorative garden spike. He understood, in other words, precisely what Brenda Fitch was attempting when she sent a man with a measuring rod onto his property and called him a surveyor. Let me back up. Ray was 61 years old, retired from a career spent designing drainage systems and retention basins for municipalities across the upper Midwest. He had the kind of methodical mind that kept files organized by date and subject and never threw away a receipt. He had also, 2 years before this story begins, sat in a hospital room in Milwaukee while his wife Lorraine finished the last of 6 rounds of chemotherapy for stage 3 ovarian cancer. She survived. They both did, in the way that people survive something like that. Differently than before, quieter, more deliberate about what they chose to spend their time on. They moved to Pinehurst Crossing, a planned community outside Knoxville, Tennessee, because Lorraine had grown up in the South and wanted to go back to it. They bought a corner lot with a large side yard and a detached workshop that Ray intended to use for woodworking. He had built furniture in his head for 30 years while he was building drainage systems for other people. He was ready to build something with his hands. He moved in during a March that smelled of red clay and early dogwood, and he was left alone for about 2 months. Then Brenda Fitch arrived. Brenda was the president of the Pinehurst Crossing Homeowners Association, and she carried herself the way certain people carry a title, as though the title were a physical object, something she had earned and intended to display. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a board president placard on the dashboard, which Ray found remarkable. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck even when she was not reading anything. She arrived at Ray's door on a Thursday morning with a citation and a tone that suggested she had been looking forward to this. The citation claimed that Ray's workshop encroached on the HOA's common area easement by approximately 3 feet. Ray asked to see the survey documentation supporting that claim. Brenda said the HOA's records were on file and available for review at the management office. Ray said he would be there Monday morning. He was. The records were not available. He documented the visit. Day 11. A man arrived at Ray's property carrying a measuring rod and a tripod and introduced himself as a surveyor retained by the HOA. Ray came outside and asked for the man's Tennessee surveyor's license number. The man said it was on file with the HOA. Ray said he would wait while the man called to confirm it. The man packed his equipment and left. Ray photographed the vehicle, the equipment, and the direction of travel. He added everything to a binder he had started on day 1. Day 19. A formal letter arrived from the Pinehurst Crossing Architectural Committee claiming that the workshop encroachment had been confirmed by survey and that Ray had 30 days to remove the structure or face a daily fine of $50. Ray read the letter twice. No survey had been completed. He had personally prevented the only attempted survey from taking place. He photographed the letter, noted the date, and added it to the binder. Day 28. A second man arrived, this one with different equipment and a different vehicle, but the same story. Ray asked for the license number again. The man provided one. Ray wrote it down. That evening, he looked it up on the Tennessee Board of Licensure for Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors website. The number belonged to a licensed surveyor named Dale Hutchinson, who had retired in 2019 and whose license had lapsed. The man who had been at his property was not Dale Hutchinson. Day 35. Ray's workshop windows were broken overnight. He filed a police report. The responding officer noted the damage. Ray photographed everything, including the angle of the broken glass, which suggested the damage had been done from outside. He added the police report number to the binder. Day 44. A flyer appeared in the neighborhood. It described, without naming him, a homeowner whose illegal structure was threatening the integrity of the community's common areas. 3 neighbors mentioned it to Ray. He collected 2 copies. He added them to the binder. Day 53. A letter arrived from a law firm called Pinehurst Property Advisors, LLP, demanding that Ray sign a voluntary easement acknowledgement confirming the 3-foot encroachment. The letter was on official-looking letterhead. Ray looked up Pinehurst Property Advisors, LLP, with the Tennessee Secretary of State. It had been registered 11 months earlier. Its registered agent was Brenda Fitch's husband. Ray added this to the binder and called a real estate attorney named Howard Crane. Day 61. A lien notice arrived claiming Ray owed $940 in accumulated fines and administrative fees. Howard Crane reviewed it and said what Sylvia Reyes had said about Marcus's lien. It was a document designed to look like a lien. The authority to file it had never been properly established under Tennessee Property Code. Day 70. Howard filed a complaint with the Tennessee Board of Licensure for Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors, citing the use of a lapsed license number by an unlicensed individual conducting what was presented as a professional survey. He also filed a complaint with the Tennessee Real Estate Commission regarding the fraudulent lien, and he filed a public records request for the full financial history of the Pinehurst Crossing HOA. What came back was instructive. Over 4 years, the HOA under Brenda's leadership had collected more than $60,000 in fines and fees from homeowners in the community. Approximately $12,000 of that had been paid to Pinehurst Property Advisors, LLP, Brenda's husband's company, for legal and administrative services. No competitive bidding, no board vote on the contract. Just Brenda signing checks to her husband's entity from an account that homeowner dues had funded. Ray kept attending HOA meetings. He sat quietly. He let Brenda run her meetings and distribute her printed agendas and describe in general terms the community's ongoing compliance challenges. He was patient. He had spent 38 years waiting for concrete to cure before you could load it. Brenda scheduled a community transparency forum for the second Friday in November. She invited a reporter from the Knoxville Sentinel, apparently hoping for a story about community governance done right. She prepared a slide presentation. She stood at the front of the Pinehurst Crossing community room and clicked through her slides and described her years of service with the kind of practiced modesty that is not modest at all. Howard Crane walked in at the 15-minute mark, accompanied by an investigator from the Tennessee Real Estate Commission and a representative from the Board of Licensure. Howard handed the HOA board secretary a certified copy of the complaint filings. The investigator asked Brenda to step away from the podium. The charges, as later filed, included fraudulent lien placement against residential property, directing an unlicensed individual to perform and represent a professional land survey, and self-dealing through undisclosed vendor contracts funded by HOA dues. The Knoxville Sentinel reporter had her story. It ran on Sunday. Ray's workshop remained exactly where he had built it. A licensed survey, conducted by an actual licensed surveyor retained by Howard Crane, confirmed that the structure was 14 inches inside Ray's property line, not 3 feet over it. 14 inches inside it. Brenda's husband dissolved Pinehurst Property Advisors, LLP, the following week. Brenda resigned from the board the week after that. The binder had 412 pages by the end. Ray told me he kept it anyway. Some measurements just don't lie. The smell of a fire station at 6 in the morning is coffee and diesel, and something underneath both of those. A metallic readiness. The scent of equipment that has been used and cleaned and will be used again. Darnell Washington had worked in that smell for 22 years, first as a probationary firefighter in Memphis, and then as a lieutenant at Station 14 in Clarksville, Tennessee. He was 47 years old, broad-shouldered, deliberate in the way that people become deliberate when their job requires them to make good decisions in the first 30 seconds of a bad situation. He had earned 3 commendations. He coached youth basketball on Tuesday evenings. He was not a man who looked for trouble. He had also, 18 months before this story begins, stood in a hospital room and held his wife Renata's hand while she died of metastatic breast cancer at 43 years old. They had been married for 16 years. She had been the one who laughed easily, who remembered everyone's birthday, who made their house feel inhabited rather than just occupied. After she was gone, the house felt very large. He moved to Millbrook Estates, a subdivision outside Clarksville, because it was close to the station and because the neighborhood had the kind of quiet that he needed. He bought a corner lot with a wide driveway because he drove a department-issued pickup, a 2019 Chevy Silverado with the fire department's insignia on the door, and he needed space to park it. The department allowed him to take the truck home. He had done it for years without incident. He moved in during a September that smelled of turning leaves and cooling asphalt, and for 2 months, he was left alone. Then Patricia Voss introduced herself. Patricia was the president of the Millbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and she had held the position for 9 years, which was long enough that she appeared to have confused tenure with authority. She was a retired insurance adjuster, which meant she had spent a career finding reasons why things did not qualify. She arrived at Darnell's door on a Tuesday evening with a printed notice and an expression that suggested she had already decided how this conversation was going to go. The notice cited Section 8.4 of the Millbrook Estates CC&Rs. Commercial vehicles, including vehicles bearing company insignia or markings, are prohibited from overnight parking in residential driveways. She pointed at the fire department seal on the door of the Silverado. She said it constituted commercial insignia. She said he had 10 days to make alternative arrangements. Darnell asked whether the rule had ever been applied to any other vehicle in the community. Patricia said that was not relevant. He asked whether she had consulted the full board before issuing the citation. She said the board supported her fully. He asked to see that in writing. She said she would follow up. She did not follow up. He documented the conversation and the citation. Day 9. A second citation arrived, this one for a small crack in the mortar between 2 bricks on his front step. Darnell photographed the crack. It was the width of a pencil line. He added the citation to a folder he had started on day 1. Day 17. Flyers appeared in the mailboxes of his immediate neighbors. He found out from a neighbor named Clarence, a retired postal worker who brought one over with an expression that suggested he found the whole thing distasteful. The flyer described, without naming him, a homeowner who had repeatedly ignored community standards and whose vehicle was creating a negative impression for the neighborhood. Darnell collected the flyer. He added it to the folder. Day 26. A letter arrived from Millbrook Property Services, LLC, demanding a $100 administrative fee for processing the original citation. Darnell looked up Millbrook Property Services, LLC. It was registered to a P.O. box in Nashville. He wrote down the registration number and added it to the folder. Day 35. His truck's rear window was cracked overnight. He filed a police report. The responding officer documented the damage. Darnell photographed everything, including the parking position, the angle of the brake, and the timestamp on his phone. He added the police report number to the folder. Day 44. A second flyer appeared, this one more specific. It described a homeowner who was under multiple citations and whose continued non-compliance was affecting property values on the block. Two of his neighbors mentioned it to him at different times that week. He collected both copies. He added them to the folder. Day 53. A letter arrived from the Millbrook Estates Architectural Review Board, a board, Darnell noted, that had never contacted him before, informing him that a formal complaint had been filed against him with the County Code Enforcement Office. He called the County Code Enforcement Office. They had no record of any complaint. He documented the call, including the name of the clerk he spoke with and the time of the call. Day 62. A third citation arrived, this one for a decorative flag he had hung on his front porch, a Memphis Tigers flag, a gift from his daughter. The citation claimed it violated the community's signage and display standards. Darnell photographed the flag, the porch, and the citation. He also photographed 3 other homes on his street with decorative flags. None of them had received citations. He added all of it to the folder. Day 71. A letter arrived from Millbrook Property Services, LLC, claiming that accumulated fines and fees now totaled $375 and that a lien had been initiated against his property. Darnell sat with that letter for a long time. Then he called a civil rights attorney named Angela Pruitt, who practiced in Nashville and had spent 15 years on housing discrimination cases. Angela reviewed the folder. She noted the pattern of citations targeting Darnell specifically, the absence of citations for comparable violations by other homeowners, and the existence of Millbrook Property Services, LLC, a private entity collecting fees from HOA residents without any disclosed relationship to the HOA board. She filed a public records request with the Tennessee Secretary of State for every entity connected to Millbrook Property Services. She also filed a request with the Millbrook Estates HOA for the full citation history of every homeowner in the community over the preceding 5 years. What came back was a pattern. In 9 years, Patricia Voss had issued citations to 41 homeowners. 37 of them were black. The community was approximately 40% black. The citation rate was not proportional. Angela noted this carefully. She also found that Millbrook Property Services, LLC, had been collecting fees from HOA residents since 2019, that it was registered to an address in Nashville that turned out to be Patricia's daughter's home, and that it had never been disclosed to the HOA board as a related party vendor. Darnell kept attending HOA meetings. He sat in the back. He said nothing. He watched Patricia run her meetings with the confidence of someone who had never been seriously questioned. He was patient. He had spent 22 years waiting for the right moment to act. Patricia announced a community safety forum for the third Thursday in February. She had invited a city council member and a reporter from the Clarksville Leaf Chronicle, apparently hoping for a story about neighborhood security and community leadership. She had prepared remarks. She stood at the front of the Millbrook Estates clubhouse, and began to speak about the importance of consistent community standards. Angela Pruitt walked in at the 10-minute mark, accompanied by a Clarksville police detective and a representative from the Tennessee Human Rights Commission. Angela handed the board secretary a certified copy of the complaint filings. The detective asked Patricia to step away from the podium. The charges, as later filed, included operating an undisclosed related party vendor scheme funded by HOA dues, filing fraudulent liens against residential property, and a fair housing complaint citing a documented pattern of racially disparate citation enforcement. The Clarksville Leaf Chronicle reporter had her story. The city council member, who had come expecting a photo opportunity, left quickly and quietly. The lien against Darnell's property was vacated within 2 weeks. The citations were voided. Patricia Voss resigned from the HOA board the following Monday. Millbrook Property Services, LLC, was dissolved shortly after. Darnell still parks the Silverado in his driveway. He still coaches basketball on Tuesday evenings. He still hangs the Memphis Tigers flag on his front porch. The folder has 408 pages. He told me he keeps it in a fireproof box. Some records just speak for themselves. The smell of fresh concrete is something Tom Garza had known since he was 14 years old, when his father first handed him a trowel and told him to pay attention to the edges. Tom was 58 years old, a licensed structural contractor with 34 years of work behind him. Foundations, load-bearing walls, commercial slabs, residential driveways. He had built things that were still standing and would be standing when he was gone. He understood in a way that was physical and not merely intellectual what it meant for a structure to be properly placed on its ground. He had also, 2 years before this story begins, buried his wife, Elena. A stroke. Sudden without warning on an ordinary Wednesday morning. They had been married for 27 years. He told me once that the worst part was not the grief. He had expected grief, but the silence. The house had been full of Elena's voice, her opinions, her running commentary on the world. And then it was not, and the silence had a weight he had not anticipated. He moved to Ridgecrest Commons, a subdivision outside San Antonio, because his daughter lived nearby and because the lot he found had a long concrete driveway. Poured right, he noted when he first walked it, good aggregate, proper slope, and a detached garage he could use as a workshop. He moved in during an October that smelled of cedar and cooling stone, and for 6 weeks he was left alone. Then Sheila Drummond introduced herself. Sheila was the president of the Ridgecrest Commons Homeowners Association, and she wore her authority the way certain people wear expensive shoes. Conspicuously, and with the implication that you should notice, she arrived at Tom's door on a Monday morning with a citation form and a smile that was doing a great deal of work. She had held the board presidency for 8 years. She had a laminated HOA charter in her tote bag that she produced when she felt her authority was being questioned, which was apparently often. The citation claimed that Tom's driveway violated Section 5.3 of the Ridgecrest Commons CC and Rs. Driveway surfaces must conform to the community's approved material and dimension standards as established by the Architectural Review Board. Sheila said the driveway was 3 feet wider than permitted. Tom looked at the driveway he had walked the day he bought the house, the driveway that had been there for 20 years, and said he would need to see the documentation supporting that claim. Sheila said it was on file. He asked for a copy. She said she would send one. She did not. He documented the visit. Day 8. A letter arrived from Ridgecrest Property Management Services demanding a $120 administrative fee for processing the citation. Tom looked up Ridgecrest Property Management Services with the Texas Secretary of State, registered 6 years earlier. Registered agent, Sheila Drummond's brother. He wrote it down. He started a binder. Day 19. A man arrived claiming to represent a law firm called Drummond and Associates. Property law. He handed Tom a letter demanding he sign a driveway compliance acknowledgement within 30 days or face escalating fines. Tom looked up Drummond and Associates, property law with the Texas State Bar. No such firm was registered. He photographed the letter, the envelope, and the man's vehicle. He added everything to the binder. Day 31. His garage workshop windows were broken overnight, police report filed, photographed, added to the binder. Day 44. Flyers appeared in the neighborhood describing a homeowner with unresolved structural violations. He collected 2 copies, added them. Day 53. A formal lien notice arrived claiming Tom owed $860. He called a property attorney named Victor Salinas, who practiced in San Antonio and had spent 20 years on title disputes. Victor reviewed the binder and said the lien had not been authorized by a proper board vote and was not valid under Texas property code. Then he said something else. He said, "Let's look at the deed." Tom had the original deed from when he purchased the property. Victor pulled the full chain of title from the Bexar County property records, every recorded instrument going back to the original subdivision plat. What he found was this: the driveway had been specifically described and dimensioned in a recorded easement that predated the CC&Rs by 4 years. The easement granted the property owner, Tom now, explicit rights to maintain the driveway at its existing dimensions. The CC&Rs could not override a recorded easement. The Architectural Review Board had no authority over a feature that was grandfathered into the title itself. The driveway was not a violation. It was a recorded right. Tom kept attending HOA meetings. He said nothing. He let Sheila run her agenda and describe her years of stewardship. He was patient. He had spent 34 years waiting for concrete to set before he walked on it. Sheila scheduled the Ridgecrest Commons annual meeting for the second Saturday in March. She had invited a local television crew for a segment on community governance. She stood at the front of the community room and began her annual address with the confidence of someone who had never lost. Victor Salinas walked in at the 8-minute mark, accompanied by a Bexar County investigator and a representative from the Texas Attorney General's office. Victor handed the board secretary a certified copy of the complaint. The investigator asked Sheila to step away from the podium. The charges included fraudulent lien placement, operating an undisclosed related party vendor funded by HOA dues, and issuing legal correspondence under a fictitious law firm name, a third-degree felony under Texas law. The lien was vacated. The citations were voided. Sheila resigned from the board the following week. Tom's driveway is still exactly as wide as it has always been. The deed said so. The deed was always going to say so. Some foundations just don't move. Let me back up. Carl Hutchins was 52 years old, a licensed master electrician out of Decatur, Georgia, 29 years in the trade. He had the kind of hands that knew every gauge of wire by feel in the dark. He had also spent the better part of the previous 3 years sitting in hospital waiting rooms, learning the particular smell of oncology floors, antiseptic and cafeteria coffee, and something underneath both that he never found a word for. His wife, Renata, had been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer in the spring of their 24th anniversary. She survived. Barely, and then more than barely, and then fully. In the stubborn way she did everything. When the doctors cleared her, Carl sold the house in Decatur and bought a modest ranch style on Pembroke Circle in the Lakeview Pines community outside Marietta. Renata wanted quiet. Carl wanted to give her whatever she asked for. That was the whole plan. Big mistake. Gloria Mercer was the HOA board president of Lakeview Pines, and she wore that title the way some people wear a crown, visibly, at all times, with the expectation that you noticed. She drove a white Cadillac Escalade with a personalized plate that read LK-VIE1. She carried a leather portfolio to every board meeting. She had a laminated copy of the community covenants in that portfolio, and she had a habit of placing it on the table in front of her before she sat down like a judge setting a gavel. Carl met her at the welcome walkthrough 3 days after he moved in. She smiled the whole time. He did not trust the smile. The first citation arrived 11 days after move-in. His work truck, a 2019 Ford F250, fully licensed, registered in his name, parked in his own driveway, was in violation of Section 4.7 of the Lakeview Pines Covenants, which prohibited commercial vehicles in residential driveways. The fine was $200. Carl read the citation twice, noted that the truck was on his private property and not in any common area, and wrote a polite letter disputing the charge. Gloria's response arrived 4 days later. The fine had doubled. Day 14, a second citation. Truck still in the driveway. Fine now $600, compounded. Day 23. Carl came home from a job site in Smyrna to find his F250 gone. Not stolen. Towed. The notice taped to his empty driveway said the vehicle had been removed by Precision Towing and Recovery on behalf of the Lakeview Pines HOA for covenant violation. He called Precision. They confirmed it. Release fee, $340, cash or card, plus a daily storage rate. Carl paid it. He documented everything. He photographed the notice, the empty driveway, the tow yard receipt. He started a binder. Day 31. Towed again. Same truck, same driveway, same company. Carl paid again. The binder got thicker. Day 44. A letter from a law firm, Hargrove and Associates, informing Carl that the HOA had retained legal counsel and that continued covenant violations could result in a lien against his property. Carl called the Georgia State Bar and confirmed that Hargrove and Associates was a real firm. He also confirmed they had been retained by the HOA. He noted that detail and kept going. Day 52. Someone keyed the passenger door of the F250. No witnesses. Carl filed a police report. He photographed the damage. He added the report number to the binder. Day 61. A post appeared in the Lakeview Pines community Facebook group. It described a homeowner on Pembroke Circle who was flagrantly disregarding community standards and creating a hostile environment for families. It did not name Carl directly. It did not need to. 3 neighbors stopped speaking to him. Renata, who had survived cancer with her composure intact, sat at the kitchen table that evening and said nothing for a long time. Carl watched her and felt something harden in him that had nothing to do with anger. Day 74. Towed a third time. Carl paid again. The storage fees alone were approaching $2,000. He kept every receipt. Day 83. Gloria appeared at his door with 2 board members behind her, a formal notice in hand, and the leather portfolio under her arm. She told him the board had voted to escalate the matter to circuit court if the violations continued. Carl nodded. He thanked her for coming in person. He closed the door. That night, he filed a Georgia Open Records request for all contracts between the Lakeview Pines HOA and any towing or vehicle removal service for the preceding 24 months. The documents came back in 12 days. They were more interesting than he had expected. The contract between the Lakeview Pines HOA and Precision Towing and Recovery included a revenue-sharing clause. For every vehicle towed from a Lakeview Pines property at HOA direction, Precision paid the HOA board's operating account a flat referral fee of $75. Gloria had signed the contract. Gloria had also, according to the board's own meeting minutes, also public record, also requested, also received, cast the deciding vote to authorize the towing program without a full homeowner vote, which the community's own bylaws required for any contracted service exceeding $500 annually. The program had generated over $4,000 in referral fees in 18 months. Carl read the documents 3 times. Then he called a real estate attorney named David Osei, who had been recommended by 2 colleagues in the trades. Osei read the contract and the minutes and looked up from the papers with an expression Carl recognized. It was the expression of a man who had just been handed exactly what he needed. They filed a complaint with the Cobb County District Attorney's Office. Theft by taking, breach of fiduciary duty, unauthorized contract. Carl also contacted a reporter at the Marietta Daily Journal who had been covering HOA disputes in the county for 2 years. He did not ask the reporter to write anything yet. He just made sure the reporter had his number. Gloria, meanwhile, had organized a community town hall at the Lakeview Pines Clubhouse for the last Thursday of the month. She had invited local press. She had prepared a presentation on covenant enforcement and community standards. She had, Carl later learned, planned to use the meeting to formally announce an expanded towing program and a new schedule of fines. She had sent the invitation to the Marietta Daily Journal herself. Carl attended. He sat in the third row. Osei sat beside him. The reporter sat in the back with a notepad. Gloria was 15 minutes into her presentation. Slides, a laser pointer, the leather portfolio open on the podium, when 2 investigators from the Cobb County DA's office entered through the side door. They waited until she finished her current slide. Carl always appreciated that detail. They were polite about it. One of them said her name. The other read the charges: theft by taking, breach of fiduciary duty, and violation of Georgia Code 44-3-232 governing HOA financial misconduct. The room went very quiet. Gloria looked at the side door, then at the podium, then at Carl. He did not look away. She was escorted out with the leather portfolio still on the podium. Precision Towing's operating license was suspended pending investigation the following week. The referral contract was voided. Every tow conducted under HOA direction during the contract period was reviewed. Restitution proceedings began. The binder Carl had been keeping was admitted as evidence, all 412 pages of it. Some people keep records. Some people keep records like they're building a case. Carl had always been building a case. Gloria Mercer pleaded guilty to theft by taking and breach of fiduciary duty 14 months after that town hall. She was sentenced to 3 years probation, ordered to pay restitution of $22,400 to affected homeowners, and permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in the state of Georgia. The owner of Precision Towing and Recovery surrendered his operating license and paid a separate civil settlement. The Lakeview Pines Board held a no-confidence vote the week after the plea. It was not close. The HOA hired an independent auditor. The auditor found 3 additional unauthorized contracts. Those are still being litigated, and I will leave them there. What happened next in Lakeview Pines was quieter and, honestly, more interesting. A handful of neighbors who had stopped speaking to Carl during the Facebook campaign showed up at his door one Saturday morning with a casserole and an apology. He let them in. Renata made coffee. It was awkward for about 20 minutes, and then it wasn't. That fall, the neighborhood organized its first annual block party. Grills on the cul-de-sac, kids on the lawns, somebody's uncle with a speaker playing Motown too loud. Carl ran the extension cords. It felt like the right job for him. Marcus Briggs, whose story started all of this, the man who first showed me that a deed is a document worth knowing by heart, used his settlement to establish the Briggs Homeowner Rights Fund, a nonprofit that provides free legal consultations to homeowners facing HOA overreach in the greater Atlanta metro area. In its first year, the fund handled 63 cases. 41 of them were resolved in the homeowner's favor without ever reaching a courtroom. The paperwork did the work. It usually does. I think about all 5 of these people, Marcus, Ray, Darnell, Tom, Carl, and what they had in common. None of them were lawyers. None of them were wealthy. Every single one of them kept records, asked questions, and refused to assume that a letter on official-looking stationery meant the person who sent it had the legal authority they claimed. That is the whole lesson. It fits on an index card. Park where you live. Know your rights. Build your community. Drop your HOA horror story in the comments. The wildest one gets featured next week. Name names if you're brave enough. Subscribe if you believe in justice served with a side of poetic irony. Next week, a retired school teacher, a forged easement, and a county commissioner who picked the wrong neighbor.